Hello everyone. You're on the Shadow Notes channel, a place where we peer into the darkest corners of our world. You might have heard about the new horror film called No Tears in Hell. It's being advertised as one of the most unsettling films of the year, based on true events. But today, I don't want to talk about the movie. I want to tell you the real story that inspired it. A story so monstrous that Hollywood screenwriters didn't even have to make anything up, because reality, as is often the case, turned out to be infinitely more terrifying. We are heading to 90s Russia, to the frozen Siberian city of Novokuznetsk, to investigate the case of Alexander Spesivtsev. For you to understand the full context, imagine the mid-90s in Siberia. The Soviet Union had collapsed a few years earlier, leaving behind chaos, poverty, and confusion. Novokuznetsk was a typical industrial city, shrouded in smog from metallurgical plants. Life was hard, and the future seemed as gray as the local sky. It was in this atmosphere of hopelessness that people began to disappear. At first, not much attention was paid to it. In times like these, people often left in search of a better life without saying a word. But then the disappearances became systematic. Teenage girls, young women, they would simply leave home and never return. The police were overwhelmed. The crime rate was through the roof, and resources were scarce. Missing persons cases were filed away in dusty folders. The first thing that struck me in this story was the scale of inaction. Dozens of reports, dozens of desperate families, and they all hit a wall of silence. On forums where this case is discussed, one former resident of Novokuznetsk wrote, "We all knew something terrible was happening in the city. It hung in the air, like the smell of soot from the factories. But no one could point a finger at where exactly the evil was hiding." And the evil was indeed hiding in the most ordinary, unremarkable panel high-rise building at 59 Pionersky Avenue, in apartment number 357. Everything changed in the spring of 1996. Plumbers were called to fix a blockage in the sewage system. Workers were cleaning the pipes in the building's basement and came across something horrible. The blockage wasn't caused by garbage, but by human remains. At first, I was skeptical about this, but then I stumbled upon a detail that changed everything. This wasn't the first such call. For months, residents had complained of a disgusting smell from the basement, and that the tap water would sometimes become strange. But no one could find the cause. The police began a door-to-door search, door by door, floor by floor. And then they came to apartment number 357. An elderly woman, Ludmila Spesivtsev, opened the door. When asked about strange smells and whether she had noticed anything unusual, she calmly replied that she hadn't. She had an ordinary family, living with her son and daughter. The officers were about to leave, but one of them caught that same sweet, nauseating smell coming from deep within the apartment. He insisted on an inspection. The woman started to get nervous, saying that her son was sleeping and couldn't be woken up. This moment became the point of no return. Despite her protests, the police went inside. You won't believe what happened next. The apartment was plunged into semi-darkness. A single light bulb dimly lit the hallway. The air was so stale and heavy with the stench of decomposition that it was almost impossible to breathe. And then they heard a faint moan from a distant room. When they opened the door to that room, reality simply fell apart. In the middle of the room, on a bed, lay a girl. She was still alive, but barely breathing. Her body showed signs of horrific injuries. But that wasn't the most horrific part. Attention, these are not my words, but a documented case. In the corner of the room stood a large metal barrel from which that same concentrated smell emanated. Inside, Inside was the desecrated body of another girl. Scattered throughout the apartment were belongings showing traces of blood, photographs of missing children, and cheerful pop music was playing from the speakers. The band Ace of Base. The contrast between this music and the scene around it was monstrous. I got goosebumps from what I found next. In the refrigerator and on the stove was clear evidence of cannibalism. This was the home of Alexander Spesivtsev, his mother, Lyudmila Spesivtseva, and his sister, Nadezhda Spesivtseva. Alexander himself was not home at that moment. Now, let's move away from emotions and, like documentary filmmakers, break down the key questions of this case. Because the story of Spesivtsev is not just the story of a maniac, it is the story of how the system and society allowed this monster to emerge and hunt for years. Version 1. The role of the mother, Lyudmila Spesivtseva. The official version states that Lyudmila was an active accomplice. It was she who lured teenage girls to the apartment under the pretext of helping carry bags or sitting with her disabled son. She prepared meals from the victim's remains for herself and her son and helped dispose of the evidence. The facts that support this are her presence in the apartment, her attempt to deceive the police, and the testimony of the sole surviving victim, Olga Galseva, who identified her. But on forums, I came across a different point of view. Some consider her a second victim of her tyrant son. Alexander had abused both her and her sister since childhood. Is it possible that she acted out of primal fear, under his complete psychological control? This question shatters the conventional notion of evil. Officially, she was convicted as an accomplice, but did she have the will to resist? That we will never know. Version 2, the failure of the system. Here's what I found in open sources, and it's shocking. Alexander Spesivtsev had come to the attention of psychiatrists long before 1996. Back in the late 80s, he was convicted for the brutal abuse of his girlfriend and sent for compulsory treatment with a diagnosis of schizophrenia. But just 3 years later, he was released. Released with a positive character reference. To test this theory of a systemic failure, I started looking for information about the state of psychiatry in Russia at that time. There was no funding, specialists were leaving, the system was in ruins. A psychopath and sadist with cannibalistic tendencies was simply released back into society. The police in turn failed to connect dozens of disappearances in the same area. This isn't just negligence, it's a symptom of the complete collapse of the law enforcement system during that period. Version 3, the nature of the monster. What made Alexander Spesivtsev who he became? He was born into a dysfunctional family. His father drank and beat his mother. He himself was a sickly, weak child who was bullied by his peers. A classic profile of many serial killers. He collected photos from accident scenes and funerals and kept diaries where he described his sadistic fantasies. He hated the world and wanted to take revenge on it by inflicting pain on the most defenseless. In his apartment, 82 sets of children's and women's clothing were found. 82! They were only able to prove 19 cases. The full scale of his hunting is still unknown. He wasn't a brilliant conspirator. He was a monstrous product of a sick society that pretended for too long that he didn't exist. Officially, the case is closed. Alexander Spesivtsev was declared insane and sent to a high-security psychiatric hospital, where, according to rumors, he remains to this day. His mother received a prison sentence. But even after analyzing all the versions, the main question remains unanswered. The police consider 19 killings to be proven. But what about the other items found in the apartment? What happened to the dozens of other missing children of Novokuznetsk? How many more victims perished in that terrible apartment on Pionersky Avenue that we will never know about? You know, while investigating the story, I didn't feel a mystical thrill. I felt an icy chill from the realization that the most terrifying monster is a human. And the most horrifying place on Earth is not an old cemetery or an abandoned house, but an ordinary apartment behind whose door hell can be hiding. What in this story shocked you the most? The mother's role, the inaction of the authorities, or the sheer cruelty of the criminal? Write your opinion in the comments. And if you want to continue exploring the most intricate and dark stories with me, subscribe to Shadow Notes. See you soon.